Hello, I'm Zach Halaschak, economics reporter for the Washington Examiner, and this is FTC Commissioner Mark Meador.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for having us here at the
Absolutely.
headquarters. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to start in. You've been on the job several months now. Any surprises out the gate, or what's it been like so far?
It's been a blast. I've really been enjoying it. Surprises haven't been too many. I worked at the FTC at the start of my career, so I'm familiar with how things kind of run generally in the building. But it's been great to reconnect with the staff and the work here. My background has been primarily in antitrust, and obviously we have another mission at FTC, which is consumer protection. And I've really been enjoying getting up to speed on that and learning about all the hard, really valuable work that our staff are doing.
Nice. And traditionally Republicans on the FTC have been sort of pro-corporations, pro-Wall Street. Can you kind of describe that shift that you're sort of trying to bring to the FTC?
Sure, and I think this is a shift that transcends partisan boundaries as well. I think we have seen, a movement within antitrust policy over the last, 8 to 10 years, and that has been a product of some self-reflection. People have been looking back at how, the economy's been functioning, how antitrust enforcement has been going, and I think, we saw an approach that was really typical of both, the Bush and Obama years, where the political appointees that were running the antitrust enforcement agencies really had a sort of default assumption that the government should be reticent to act, that they were very worried about over enforcement, about these sort of false positives where they sued to block a merger or enjoin conduct, and actually it turns out it would have been good for consumers. And the problem with that approach was we ended up with increasing market consolidation, with decreasing quality and rising prices for consumers. And this is something we've seen across the country. You ask people if they're satisfied with how the economy is functioning today, and it's almost unequivocally no. And that's not just antitrust enforcement, but it's had a large part to play. And I think because of that dissatisfaction, it's caused a lot of folks to reconsider our approach to various forms of economic regulation. Antitrust isn't regulation per se, it's really law enforcement, but the choices we make in how and when to enforce the law have a huge effect on our economy. And so that's been part of the conversation is what has our approach been to antitrust? Has it been the right one? And given that a lot of us really haven't been satisfied with how things have gone, we've been willing to reconsider some assumptions in how we've done things in the past and whether that's what we should do going forward.
Do you think that this kind of new shift toward more of a populist view on not just antitrust but other things within the Republican Party is kind of here to stay? Is this like the new normal? And do you think that's also kind of happening with Democrats? You had people like Lena Khan, who J.D. Vance said he was a fan of, if you will, and it seems like it's kind of cut both ways. Is that what you're seeing as well?
There's a lot of movement. I'll let Democrats speak for the Democratic Party, but within the Republican Party, I think this is a conversation that's going to be ongoing for a long time. Yeah. I don't think it's the case that everyone agrees on everything. That's obviously not true. But I don't see really any chance that we just revert back to the way that we were doing things in 2008. There have so many things have changed in the economy, in our political base. The party has, very rightly in my view, taken a turn to consider the interests and concerns of the working class. And I think that's a critical effort, and we need to encourage that. And so there's going to be ongoing dialogue between sort of, both strains of thought within the conservative movement and within the Republican Party about how we protect legitimate business interests and balance that with ensuring that we're protecting the average person, the consumer. And the good news to me is that we're actually having that conversation. That's not something I think that most Republicans were thinking too hard about for many years, and that has changed. I think that's one of the best changes we've seen really since President Trump came onto the scene. And that's a very good thing. I think that conversation will continue in the decades to come.
And big is bad. You've kind of had this mantra, if you will, not just government, but also, corporations and business. Is that pretty much always the case, or do you think there's ever exceptions to that rule, if you will?
There's always nuance. Lawyers, we never like to paint in black and white. Everything's gray for us. But when I wrote that in my paper, the simple point I was observing was, conservatives have been very good about pointing out the dangers of concentrated political power. Yeah. When it comes to big government, we don't hesitate to say that's bad and dangerous and we need to be worried. But for some reason, when it comes to concentrated economic power, suddenly, oh, well, that's fine. Or, they don't have a standing army. You can choose what products you buy, that sort of thing. Not a big deal. And what we've seen in the last probably 10 to 15 years, and a lot of this has been driven by the behavior of large technology companies, is that it's just not true. That large economic actors have an immense amount of power over our daily lives. They control how we do our banking, how we buy and sell products, how we communicate with our loved ones, how we engage in the public sphere and political debate, the news we read, the products we buy, all of this. It's really inescapable. And that has as much of a bearing on human flourishing and the functioning of our society as our political governance. And often the two are deeply intertwined. And so we can't take this sort of what I think is a naive view that only big government is the threat. We have to realize that big business can be a threat as well. It doesn't mean that being big is illegal. That's not the position of the antitrust laws. It's not illegal to have a monopoly. It's illegal to maintain it through certain forms of conduct, but it's not illegal to be big. But when something is big, our sort of spidey sense should kick in, right? Mm-hmm. Like we should be more concerned and attentive to the potential risks there and ensuring that we're not letting, some political ideology distract us from a genuine threat that can harm people.
Yeah. And, on the topic of big tech, obviously the big tech ecosystem has sort of evolved and evolves very quickly. We saw with AI how quickly that became sort of integrated into the mainstream from just, an idea several years ago. What is keeping you up at night these days? What do you think the biggest threat with big tech is, and how do you mitigate that?
Probably a few things. So one, I think my biggest concern, and this goes in big tech cases, but sort of across the economy, is really protecting families and children. I think that's probably the most pressing concern of our time, is how to protect children online. COSA is a great example. We're doing a lot here at the FTC, ongoing enforcement efforts as well as cases we've brought recently. We've had a little bit of time with the internet now, and we have a very good sense of all the benefits that it has brought us, but we now have a very good sense of some of the harms and risks that are present. And I think this is a conversation that's happening at a national level as we're all sort of trying to sort out what are the norms that we as a society should have in place to protect children when they're on the internet. And this is a role where the FTC, or a place where the FTC has a role to play. There's going to be a lot that families have to decide on their own. Individual families and parents working with their children are going to have to make a decision as to what's best for them. But we can help by ensuring that bad actors are being stopped and that we are giving them the tools that they need to protect their children adequately. So that's kind of the first place that I start. The other thing that I think is a lesson we've learned, I don't know if everyone has accepted it, but when the internet was booming in the early 2000s, the 2010s, there was, I think, a pervasive mindset, if not a consensus view that technology evolves quickly, these things are changing rapidly, we don't want to get in the way of innovation and progress, so let's just do a light touch and not interfere so that everything can develop naturally. We tried that, and we've seen the consequences. And it's a very mixed record at best, right? There's been a lot of harm that has come from that. We've seen several companies consolidate in their own markets and amass immense amounts of economic power. And that's not to say that we should be doing, ex ante regulation. I don't think we should be micromanaging the internet economy or the tech sector, but we can't just step away entirely either. We've seen what happens when antitrust enforcers, for example, take their foot off the gas and just assume the free market will work it out. The free market only functions when we have competition, and that's our job, is to ensure that we have competition. So as we look ahead to all the new technologies that are coming into play, including with AI, we don't want to regulate that. We don't want to get in the way of natural technological development, but we also want to make sure that competition is protected. And I think that's the big duty we have right now, is to avoid the mistakes of the past, to make sure we maximize the returns that we get from innovation and natural market developments, while ensuring that we protect consumers against further economic consolidation that can harm them in all of the ways that we've seen in recent years.
And I think this week I saw that the FTC filed a lawsuit against, I can't remember the name of the company, but the pornography company.
ILO.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and sort of what the aim of that is?
Yeah, so this was a case where it involved deception by ILO as to how they handled child sexual abuse material and non-consensual material. Essentially, they were telling people that they policed their websites for this sorts of content, that they took it down, that they verify the ages of people in all the videos, and it just wasn't true. It was repeated deception as to their efforts. And so we stepped in, we imposed a very strong injunctive order against them that will require extensive compliance efforts on their part to ensure this doesn't happen again. There's a much bigger problem with even the quote-unquote consensual pornography that's out there. It poses a grave threat to children. But this is the first step that we could take under the powers that we have. My only concern with that case is really that we weren't able to recover money for victims. Since a Supreme Court case several years ago, the Federal Trade Commission hasn't been able to recover monetary damages for claims under Section 5. And so in this instance, we were limited to what the state of Utah was able to recover, which was a modest amount. And in the future, I'm hoping that Congress will act and restore that power to the commission so that we can not only stop that bad conduct, but then recover something for those victims.
And then also this week, non-competes. There's some news there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had a consent order entered with a company called Gateway. It involved pet cremation services. And they had acquired a number of companies in that space and then imposed non-compete agreements. And they were extremely broad, including employees that were hired 2 weeks before a company was sold off, across all different levels of employees, not just executives, even lower level employees. And in our position was that this impeded entry from competitors into the marketplace. It impeded worker mobility to go work for a competing firm or to start up their own business. And overall is hampering competition in that marketplace. So again, we entered into a consent with them that gets rid of those non-competes. And this is part of a renewed effort on the part of the commission to take enforcement against anti-competitive non-compete agreements incredibly seriously. In conjunction with this, we issued a request for information. So if anyone out there, if you are subject to a non-compete that you believe is unfair, we encourage you to respond to that RFI and let us know about it because we are actively looking for new investigations in that space. Great.
And then I believe before you were FTC Commissioner, you once branded Google a monopolist. Do you think that still is the case? And if you want to go a little bit beyond Google too, what are some of the companies that you see maybe outside of your power to break them up or do anything right now, but what are kind of the biggest offenders in that space?
Sure. Well, it's not just my opinion. Several federal judges and at least one jury have determined that Google is a monopolist. So that is a settled fact under the law as of now. I'll let the Department of Justice comment on their ongoing litigation. And as I said, we have several enforcement matters pending here. We have ongoing litigation against Meta and Amazon and other investigations that are still non-public. So I won't get ahead of our process and our staff in making broad determinations about the legal status of any company, but this remains an area that we're extremely concerned about. It's sort of a two-front war. We're both fighting the battles of yesterday. A lot of these are cases that should have been brought 10 or 15 years ago. So for example, the FTC had an investigation into Google around 2011 to 2013 and let them off with a slap on the wrist. That was a case that the Department of Justice then picked up in 2020 at the end of the first Trump administration and now has seen through to completion. Same thing with DOJ's ad tech suit, a series of acquisitions that DOJ and FTC under the Bush and Obama administrations let go through without much scrutiny, resulted in a massive monopoly that again resulted in Google being held to be a monopolist. We're waiting to see what the remedies will be there as well. Same thing with the Meta case that we're currently litigating. This involves acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp that happened in prior administrations that, again, we've had to come back and clean up the mess because of under-enforcement of the antitrust laws in the past. So that's just one thing we're doing, is trying to fix the mistakes of the past and then at the same time avoid making those mistakes going forward. So that really goes to the efforts we have underway now, which most of that is non-public, but we're actively looking into the space to make sure the mistakes that the prior administrations made don't happen on our watch.
And you kind of touched on this earlier, but when it comes to balancing these priorities at the FTC, specifically for mergers, how do you sort of balance the need to prevent monopolization while also, pushing back? Some people might say that that would make products cheaper for consumers or might benefit consumers. Where do you strike that balance, and how do you do that?
This is a great question. That is the core of merger enforcement. So, I think our view, and I won't speak for the other commissioners, but I think we all share this approach, is to say, look, not all mergers are bad. Most mergers are good. Most mergers help reallocate resources across the economy in a more efficient way so that capital is where consumers have demand and are serving their interests. But some mergers are very anti-competitive. What we had seen in the past, again, was this sort of laissez-faire approach to merger enforcement that assumed almost all mergers were good. I think with the last administration, that was inverted to a place where the assumption, they may not have stated it explicitly, but a lot of people in the building simply felt that all mergers were bad. We're trying to avoid the two extremes and really chart a path down the middle where we say mergers have an important role to play in our economy. Many of them, if not most, are often good and helpful to consumers, but there are some that raise serious concerns. And when those concerns are present, we won't hesitate to step in and defend consumers to protect their interests and stop anti-competitive mergers. And there the question really is those benefits you mentioned, right? Are they real? And are they going to accrue to the benefit of consumers? Some mergers can yield efficiencies, but it really just comes in the form of dividends for shareholders. When we're looking at a merger at the FTC, our primary question is, how will this affect consumers? Is it going to make the market work better for them? If so, great. We don't want to get in the way of that. But if not, if it's going to consolidate power in a way that allows a company to extract more from consumers without giving them something meaningful in return, then we will step in and stop that.
And in you had a paper earlier this year that kind of outlines your antitrust policy vision, your vision here at the FTC. You talk about how markets aren't self-perpetuating. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, look, we are a rules-based society. We live under the rule of law. That's what we aspire to, at least. And markets are no different. The free market, the invisible hand is not this sort of anthropomorphic thing that exists in and of itself. It's a system of law and order that has to be maintained through deliberate action and choices, and that includes law enforcement. The founders, when they were crafting the Constitution and writing the Federalist Papers in defense of it, talk about how, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But we do. We aren't perfect people. We're fallen, and we have urges and desires that are not conducive to good social order. And government exists to constrain that to promote human flourishing. The market is similar, right? The market is the collection of interactions of human beings in the economic space. We don't suddenly become perfect and no longer fallen when we're engaged in business as opposed to the rest of our lives. And so the desires and impulses of economic actors are no less subject to having, impure motives. The drive to accumulate capital isn't limited to proper licit means. And so in order to protect the free market, where we have a fair exchange of goods and services in a way that promotes innovation, that benefits consumers, and again, encourages human flourishing within society, we have to have rules that are enforced to ensure that the terms on which those exchanges take place are fair and equitable. That's where the antitrust laws come in, is to ensure that we have a genuine competitive process where different firms are competing to see who can benefit consumers the most, not just competing to see who can get the biggest.
And sort of on the issue, I'm sure you talk to companies all the time, executives at companies. What are you hearing on the tariff front? Is that something that comes up frequently?
Not so much. That it's a little outside our bailiwick,
okay.
So I'll leave that to others. But I think what we're hearing is a desire for predictability and stability in the rule of law, and I think that's what we've been trying to provide to settle some of the turbulence from both under enforcement and over enforcement under prior administrations, and again, strike that middle path where the business community understands that we are here to enforce the law, and we're going to have the rule of law, and we're going to enforce the law vigorously and effectively, but we're not here just to stop every merger because we hate them, nor to let everything through. And so they know what they're going to get. They can come in and deal with us on fair terms and understand that We may disagree, but we're going to give them the correct process and try to reach the correct outcome.
Just looking around the office, you have Teddy Roosevelt there, and I see a mug with Hamilton. What from history, what figures, presidents or otherwise, or maybe even other FTC commissioners, do you sort of look to and research and read about to draw inspiration and kind of do your job?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think I cited a lot of those in my paper, which folks are free to go look at. President Roosevelt, the authors of the Federalist Papers. I would go back to Edmund Burke, other conservative thinkers like Russell Kirk have been really formative for me. And this is something I think that as conservatives and Republicans we need to recover. The reason I draw on those sources is there really is a rich tradition within conservative thought of being concerned about concentrated economic power, not just concentrated political power. And you really have to have both of those together in tandem, I think, to have an effective conservative governing philosophy.
And then just finally, we touched on it earlier, but libertarianism, this idea, was popular. It's had different times in history where it's, had third-party moment. 2016, we thought it would be, wasn't as big as. Do you think that movement sort of dying or dead, and or?
No, it's not dead. I think it will always be there, but it's never going to really gain attraction. I think libertarianism, and there's a lot of ways we could describe and to discuss the philosophy, and there are different strains within that, so I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. But ultimately, I think a political philosophy that is oriented around what the government should not do is not going to capture the imagination of the American people. We're interested in actually accomplishing good things, of pursuing real goals, not just standing by and letting the winds blow us to and fro.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, and thanks for watching, everyone. It's Zach Halaschak for the Washington Examiner signing off.